Excellent. And I think you probably just heard the meeting is recorded. So that's something we just want you to be aware of as we move forward. And I think we'll go ahead and start. Ross has a wonderful set of discussion questions for us during this time. Thank you, Ross, for being here. And I'm sorry, I would like to open with prayer before I let Ross have the floor. So let us pray. Holy Mystery, wonderful God, we give you thanks for the gift of this time together from all across in different parts, wherever we might be coming from, and with whatever knowledge we have about LGBTQ issues. God, we thank you that this is a safe space, an open space to learn and discuss, also that all of your creation might feel comfortable and safe and cherished in our churches and faith communities. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, Ross, it's all you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this book study. And I will especially give really big thanks to Molly Beck-Dean, who really steered this and spearheaded this, and for Todd Bugler for lending the ELC Youth Ministry Network and their support and their mail list and their help with this. So these things really came together because of the ELC Youth Ministries and the ELC Youth Ministry Network, and Molly and Todd have been really the drivers for those. So thank you for that. As Janelle said, this is like little housekeeping stuff at first. I don't do a ton of fancy stuff for this, but I do utilize the chat quite a bit. So while we're here right now, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, say hi, where you're from, pronouns, things like that. Let us know who you are and where you are, stuff like that. And we have this over the course of the next 3 weeks. So kind of the breakdown that we thought about doing this, the first 2 sections, I'm going to lead a chunk of it. And I will probably talk for about 20 minutes or so, and then I'm going to turn it over to some small group discussion conversation with some guiding questions, but opportunity to let you all chat with each other about things that you are thinking about based on the book or based on the presentation that I'll give to you. And then the last section will be coming all back together and doing a little bit of read report out. So when you're in small groups, I still encourage you to use your chat to kind of keep notes for each other. If you can get a note taker, put that there. And then when we get back into the big group, paste it into the big group, because I think we'll try to capture some of that. We talked about doing the thing with the Google Doc and everyone writing at the same time, and I got a little scared of that, so I didn't go down that path. But we may come back to that. So we're going to experiment with all the learning styles now, which will be kind of fun. The other way that and then the third one section that we're going to do in 2 weeks from now will be a panel with more folks. You're not just hearing from me because there are way better and other folks that can expand on this entire conversation. And I'm excited that we got to get it going. And I'm going to break these first 2 sections down a little bit into what I kind of call like internal work and external work. And so you'll see me talk a little bit. I'm not going to take this like chapter by chapter. And this is why we kind of said we assume that you had most or all of it read by this point. But a lot of the questions that come up are this kind of internal logistics. What's the kind of stuff that we have to be thinking about? What practices or policies should we change? How do I do this? What is the right language and terminology? How do I not be offensive? Like stuff like that. And that's what we'll talk about some today. And then next week when we come back, I'm going to talk about what looks like external and to think a little bit about what youth ministry looks like beyond the walls of your church. It's not just the young people that are in our youth ministries or in our congregations. Our ministry is for the world. And from an LGBTQ perspective, that's going to look a little bit like advocacy, like public presence, like public witness, so that young people, their parents know that we are a open, welcoming, affirming, supporting space that is going to speak up and step up for them. So that's a little bit of our breakdown that we're going to do today. I am also going to make the assumption that you are here because you want to welcome and include and support LGBTQ youth. This conversation and the book, you probably figured this out in the book, is not really about the debate about LGBTQ people. We've kind of lived through debate for a really long time. And in forming the naming project, and in writing the book, I and we that work with the Naming Project operate under the assumption that LGBTQ people are a part of God's creation and are meant to live full, abundant lives through the grace of Jesus Christ, the same way that we all are. And so you, instead of saying, is being LGBTQ a sin? Do we have to look at whether the Bible permits it or not? Actually operate off of, it is not a sin. It's a part of God's creation. We see ourselves living and affirming in Scripture, and our young people who are figuring out and discovering who they are and sharing them with us are also a part of that as well. And so this is not the place for that debate. There's some resources at the end of the book that kind of talk about other places that can do some of the biblical conversation, the debate. And so then where we go from there is kind of figuring out and knowing who LGBTQ youth are. One of the things that I come up with in this is that I've been a part of the debates, and the debates in the ELCA around LGBTQ people have largely been centered on adult issues, ordination, or marriage. And those are both good things, and I'm glad that we have them in our church and in society. But that doesn't necessarily answer a question for a 14-year-old that is trying to figure out the words to describe how they're feeling and how they're attracted to somebody else or how they see or understand themselves. The conversations about marriage and ordination, these adult issues, don't help a young person deal with bullying that they're facing on a daily basis. And so I kind of step back a little bit. And one of the things we have to do and figure out as adults is, who are LGBTQ youth? The thing about this community, this LGBTQ community, which I think is, we are a community that's made up of an acronym, and an acronym that has grown and changed and evolved over time. And I am a 44-year-old white cisgender gay man. So I have a certain view and a certain perspective on the world for how I understand myself and how I navigate the world. This next generation is actually much more expansive than what I came to learn for myself. And a lot of what I learn about society, I learn through young people because I hear the words that they're using to describe themselves. So there was a time when the LGBTQ community was being named by folks that were outside the community, and we were kind of all called homosexuals. And over time, we wanted words to describe ourselves that meant something for ourselves. And so you get terms like gay, which sometimes for a while was kind of the catch-all: gay and lesbian, LGBT, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, LGBTQ, LGBTQIA plus. A plus implied at the end that there are so many more sexual orientations and gender identities and ways to experience the world. And these are expanded, right? I said, like, I'm gay. I use one of the kind of the most basic terms to use to describe ourselves. For young people, what they might realize is, now that there is a society that is more open and accepting, it lets them want to be more precise in the language that they are going to use to talk about themselves. So I will use LGBTQ in my conversation. That's what we use at GLAAD, which is my day job. So I'm kind of used to that. And there are bigger acronyms. They're more expansive. There are going to be more terms. One stat that we came up with at GLAAD doing some polling is this youngest generation. 20% of them see themselves as a part of the LGBTQ community in some way. And I mean the bigger, broader LGBTQ community. We asked the question, are you 100% straight? Are you 100% cisgender? And for language, for folks that don't know, cisgender is that language of the way I see and understand myself, and my gender matches the way that I've been perceived by the outside world, especially by the doctor when I was birthed. And so for those of us, like, I see myself as a man, everyone else looks at me and sees and understands myself as a man, that's cisgender. That's me. That's most of us. If you want to be the opposite of transgender, you can, but those two are kind of in complement. For Latin nerds, cis means on the same side as, Latin means crossing over. And so that's where those come from. So we see these, that 20% of people say that they are not strictly heterosexual and they are not strictly cisgender. They're not all calling themselves gay the same way that I am. They might not even calling themselves gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender. They're going to be using more precise language to describe who they are and how they experience themselves in the world, for understanding who they are and how they understand their relationships. So we have to think about how we build youth ministries, how we build congregations as a way to do that. So a few things that I want to kind of give up front that you probably got some from the book. Do a little bit of an assessment, like figure out, are there young LGBTQ people in my congregation? Even if you don't know who they are, the answer is probably yes. So there's an assumption to make there. Are there in my community? Even if you don't know who they are, the answer is probably yes. And then start to think about what resources exist for young people in my congregation or in my community. Are we adding or complementing or giving something special? Or are we replicating the GSA program that's at the high school or the youth drop-in center or something else? And who in my congregation are the resources? If a young person comes out to me and they're kind of scared, and they're scared of what their family is going to do or say, and if they're going to get rejected, I can be a welcoming person. Do I know who else would be a really good person maybe for them to talk to and to hear some experience from? Just having notes like that for yourself to understand what your context is will help to make the ministry for LGBTQ young people easier, better, and safer. And I say this because, there's a presumed heterosexuality and there's a presumed cisgender identity that kind of exists, that we assume, our society still kind of assumes that when a baby is born, it's probably heterosexual and cisgender. It probably shouldn't be that way, but the reality is it is. And so for them to come out and to say, I'm actually not what you've assumed me to be, that's a little scary. And it's scary when it comes to authority figures or relationships. It's scary to come out to family. Even if your family is good and progressive and maybe we think that they're accepting, that fear still exists because those are the closest, most personal relationships. And maybe there is a fear about coming out of church because there's a narrative and an assumption that churches are unwelcoming places, which means we have to do the work to prove that our church is not like that. And we can't assume that they know that because the message exists everywhere else that churches are going to be condemning places. And so we're going to have to be proactive with those messages, enough for them to feel that they trust us to come out to us and share who they are, and for us to help to provide good resources to them of, here's some good other people inside the congregation that would be good to talk to. Or maybe when you do tell your parents, maybe this is someone your parents can talk to. Here's the organizations that exist in town so that you can join the club at school or the teacher or things like that, right? We can help to map that for them, but we can only do that if we know. And you know your communities way better than I can tell you what your communities are. So what I'm telling you up front is kind of think through, if a person comes to me, what am I going to tell them? Who am I going to tell them is safe? Then we kind of think through our logistics, right? What's the way that we've always done something? There's an idea in terms of queer theory that to queer something is to examine the lenses, examine the assumptions that we have that go into something. Having a young person, having your first young person come out does make you examine your assumptions. And you suddenly think, oh, well, the way that we did this for a long time, maybe that's not so good for a lesbian, or maybe that's not so good for a transgender student. Maybe we need to think about this. And maybe you think, okay, I've thought through it, and actually it is kind of still the best thing. It's okay if the way we did it worked, and it still can work, but it's worth asking the questions. So these are questions that we get. Sleeping arrangements, right? That's the most common one. And I will say the two it depends type answers are, what your youth makeup. You don't want to put the one queer kid in a room by themselves away from everybody else. That's isolating and lonely. If you've got 4 or 6 or 8, that's a whole different situation, right? And then what's the architecture that you're dealing with? The first year at our camp, everyone constantly asked us what our sleeping arrangements were, and we didn't know the answer ourselves. And so what we did was we pulled the mattresses off the beds of the cabins and pulled them into the chapel, and everybody slept on the floor of the chapel together like it was a big lock-in. Nobody had privacy. We were all in one big room together. We had a mattress, thankfully, and it was very cold that year. So we also like all smashed up very close to the fireplace so that we could get warm. So it served a couple purposes. It worked well for us. We've gone on since there. Bay Lake that we work with has now a lodge with rooms that sleep 4 to 6 to 8 people, and we'll put groups in there. Each room has their own private bathroom, which is great. There's the privacy. It's got sinks that are out, so people can be brushing their teeth while someone's in the shower. And we also ask that rooms doors stay open when people sleep, so it's still semi-private. Someone asked about this, the youth gathering, and Molly can jump in on this too. But my experience is youth gathering is very hotel centric in your housing, right? And so if you want privacy, everyone can get a room by themselves. That's probably kind of expensive. You don't want to do that. It would take up the housing stock in whatever city you're in. 4 to a room is probably what most of us do. But when you add an LGBTQ person, you might think, what's the most comfortable thing for everyone? What's most comfortable for the queer kid? What's the most comfortable for the non-LGBTQ kids? Maybe the answer in that situation is that, like say a young transgender person, and you're really confused. What if the transgender person stayed with their friends and people they knew and liked and trusted the most? And that gender wasn't actually a factor, but like the relationship was the factor, that you knew that this is where comfort was going to be and people felt safe. I don't want the transgender kid to feel unsafe, but I don't want the other kids to either. And we can create situations that help. So that's my short answer for sleeping. Registration forms, right? What information do we ask for and why do we need to know it? Do we ask for parents? Do we say mother and father? Do we put gender? Do we have gender checkboxes of which one someone is? Bathroom signage. You put up signage to let people know that people can use bathrooms that align with their gender identity. Do we make sure that people know that even with the gender signage, we don't need to police who goes into what bathroom? And it's not up to us or anyone else to control that. Especially, again, if you're working with a place like a hotel that has their own security, some of this is a little beyond your control. Let's see. Whether or not people share pronouns. I put mine in my little name here on Zoom, which can be a helpful signal for folks. But again, I'm cisgender. Most people probably looked at me and assumed he, him is accurate. And that can be helpful to create a safe space, but it also can be forcing people to put themselves on display. There's not a one size fits all kind of with this. How do we divide up small groups? Is it still worthwhile to have a boys small group and a girls small group? It may be, it may not be. At the Naming Project, we now do 3. And youth can self-select into these groups, and you can only be in one room at a time. So if you're identifying as female, girl, feminine end of the spectrum, go in this room over here. If you're in the boy, male end of the spectrum, go in this room over here. If you are in between or neither or other or something, or one of those 2 categories doesn't fit, here's another room where we can talk about that, and having adults that can fit in there. And so there are worthwhile conversations. And then I'll say this last piece before I kind of like turn us over into some conversation. It also allows us to examine how we do and share our messages, what kind of Bible studies we do, what kind of lenses and perspectives might come onto stories like the centurion that begs Jesus to heal his slave, and looks more like a lover perhaps than of a master. Or a relationship between Jesus and his disciples when he says, what are they saying about me? Who do they say that I am? And then turns to his disciples, his closest friends, and says, but you, who is it that you say that I am? And how much vulnerability comes into asking someone to reflect back to you whether they are truly seen and known and identified. Over into our songs. What kind of language are we using to describe God, to describe people? Can we write new songs that can give us a much more expansive understanding? And even things like relationships, sex ed. Some of you, I assume, do things like relationships and sex ed. And I think those can be, sometimes adding LGBTQ youth can feel like that's daunting. But I'll give you a few recommendations. There is a curriculum called Our Whole Lives which is a joint program between, and I'm pasting it here, which is why I'm taking a second. It's jointly written between the United Church of Christ and the Unitarian Universalists. And it is age appropriate. It is not LGBTQ specific, but it's LGBTQ inclusive. And it runs the gamut from, I think, 3 to 30. So it's not quite our whole lives yet, but they're working on it. And they've got different segments. We use it for a portion of our camp, and I think is worthwhile. So I'm going to give you a handout before we break here. This was created for the extravaganza, and I'm kind of doing this book club kind of in the same way that we did 2 workshops, the extravaganza. So you're going to see both in one. The internal piece has some of those things that I just talked about, the registrations and the small groups and the sleeping arrangements and the logistical kind of stuff. And I'm just seeing if I can, sorry. I'm trying to, I don't know, Michael, if you can share it from your end, maybe you can get in there. I can't quite get it uploaded the way I was thinking I could. I'll try to get it before we get back together. And answering those questions. And then the second one was a little bit more what we'll talk about next week, kind of the external witness as well. That was me throwing a lot at you. So Molly's right. Drop questions or thoughts or comments into the chat here. What we'll do is we will go into some small group conversations for about 15 minutes or so. And then we'll come back. And what I'd love to get are 2 things. One, readouts from what your conversation was like, if folks can verbally say that, or if people can also repaste your small group chat into the big group chat would be really helpful. And then if you have other questions that you have for me or for other folks. And, oh, thank you, Michael. There's a link that just got shared here, and that is the handout. So the questions that I want us to discuss when you're in small groups, and these are really intended to be high level. These are intended to spark conversation. If you go in a different direction than other than what I told you, it's okay. Think for yourselves, what resources exist for LGBTQ youth in your community? And talk about that with your partners. Maybe your congregation is one of those resources. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not yet, but there's a process you can go through to kind of get there. And then what resources also exist within your congregation for a young person that comes out? So I talked about that at the beginning. That's one thing I want to discuss. The other thing, just based on what we said here, what policies or practices can you re-examine in the light of LGBTQ inclusion for youth ministry? And I am going to put those links here, or I'm going to put those questions here in the chat so you have them. There's 1. There's 2. And have a conversation around both of those things. And like I said, when we come back, we'll hear from what folks talked about, and then I'll field any other questions that folks have. So are we good to go into small groups?
Ross, I just want to mention that we haven't had any questions yet, but we have had some great thoughts on what you've already been doing, and that they have appreciated the gender forms that you've made available and how to do that. And then also people who have loved your extravaganza workshop. So just some great thumbs up for all that you've been doing so far.
Great, thank you. I will read and catch up on that while you're in small groups. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It seems like we're here. I'm going to give it another second just because I see cameras coming on right now. So as we come back, I have a couple of things I'm going to ask you to do. If folks were a part of the small group and took any notes, had any conversation, have something written down, if you would copy and paste that in the chat, even if you put it in the chat in your small group, because I have learned through Zoom, small group chat does not translate over into big group chat. And so if you can repaste that, then you can share your wisdom and your conversation with everyone else there. But I also wanted to give a moment here to see if anyone verbally had things they wanted to read out or had thoughts or questions, or just that question, Maria. If someone wants to bring something up verbally, you can, or you can also put it in the chat once we kind of have the readout here as well. Anyone bold enough to get started?
You'll find I talk too much, but I love the idea of the petri dish of the kids that get it and are comfortable. And even if you have just a small pocket, of conversation that's working, though that does grow out. And I also loved your lead on the rituals and the prayers and the blessings that we can like proactively offer and give to our kids that do come out or express interest in being addressed differently than they've been used to all their lives. Those two things I really liked.
Yeah, we were in the same small group. So we talked a little bit about the idea of rituals and blessings and recognizing those kind of milestone moments that exist for LGBTQ adolescents, name changes, first date, coming out, stuff like that. And I think this is one important thing I would say is that, some of those things are, if you're in the right congregation, you've got it set up, are great, Sunday morning worship recognition. Some things might be small and private, maybe just within the youth ministry. And some things might be like you and the youth directly just having a prayer one-on-one. I see someone asked about where can I find those rituals and blessings? The answer is you can find them all over the place. I am not a liturgy person, so I do not create them. If you read the book, you'll hear the story about the kid who was coming out and asked us to do a blessing. Pulled that prayer right out of our asses and prayed out loud because we didn't know it was coming, didn't know it was going to happen, just happened spontaneously. But there are liturgies for name changes. I know that some congregations have done. If you know the organization Reconciling Works, I believe they have some on their website. If you have these in your congregation or you know where you find them, drop those in the chat to share them with everyone else as well. And I don't know if there are other ones for coming out or for first dates or for activist moments. If you have them, share them. I think they're a cool idea, but again, liturgy is not my gift, so I leave that to other folks that do have that gift. Anyone else want to do a readout from your small group? I see someone here. Go ahead. Go ahead, Pastor Melvin.
I was going to say, well, we also talked about, I know a lot of people mentioned the inclusive language and just using inclusive language in lots of ways to make sure we're not using gender language. We also talked about like the difficulty with going to spaces, like even within the ELCA, like camps, where camps are often divided in cabins and other spaces and bathrooms and whatnot for just genders, male and female genders, and not all genders. And so the tricky part for that, I said, like, if you're staying at a church, it's easy because you can put up, if there's a single bathroom, you can just bring your own sign or make your own sign and say all gender bathroom. But it's hard when you go to a camp, and that's how they do things constantly. And that's what I'm kind of struggling with. I know they're supposed to go through some process of changing that, but I know the camp that we go to has not yet.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I mean,
with what you do with that.
Yeah, you are. It's a little bit, you're a little at mercy of what the architecture is. And the fact we've had architecture so long live under like the two gender reality. So in my day job, I also do this for like companies and corporations, and they'll ask me questions about what to do about bathrooms. I was like, well, if you have unlimited money, you can tear down the building and start all over, and I'll give you some thoughts about how to do that. Nobody wants to do that, right? So it's true, right? Our congregations were built 50, 100 years ago, right? And have their two restrooms set up the way that they do. Our camps, any of our public spaces are like that as well. So there's different levels of control that you can have. And I'll give you a few of the things that can do. If you are taking over a space, seriously talk to the folks about whether you can control the restrooms within your own space. And when we go to the naming project, for a while, their camps were gendered, and we put our own very creatively worded signs like, you, this restroom is for you, stuff like that. We just made up poetry about gender neutral restrooms because we all knew where they were anyway. So I think that, you can do that. When I do my work at GLAD, we will, if we do a big event, we'll also take over the space. And honestly, for that, we first made gender neutral restrooms. People made jokes about it. And so underneath, we put statistics about transgender people being harassed and attacked in restrooms. And that made sure people understood the why we're doing it, which was good for a bigger, broader audience that didn't always necessarily get it. So that was our way of communicating it. If it is worthwhile to have that conversation with whatever space you're using, whether it's a convention center or a hotel or a camp. For the ELCA, I know this because I'm involved with it. There is the Total Inclusion Initiative, which is helping camps to become more welcoming and inclusive to LGBTQ people, people with disabilities, and people of color. They kind of specifically name those three populations. And so there's some educational stuff that's going to be happening now, and probably some of what you're asking about is going to be coming out in the next year or two, which is going to help for folks. But again, changing architectures is a little can be challenging. The other thing I would say, if you absolutely cannot control a restroom space and someone has to use the bathroom, you're on a trip, you're going to the gas station, and you have to go to the gas station, right? I think it's also helpful for folks, if you know there are young people that may know or feel vulnerable, again, going in groups, going in packs, going with their friends, and having the friends kind of know, maybe this is a little secret, or have a little side cover of like, hey, make sure they're okay. Make sure that they're not going to get harassed by a stranger or somebody else that's using the gas station restroom, right? And that you can go and watch out for each other. And so that could be something else. And then, again, it's different levels of what you actually have control over, and to think through what that might look like for whatever given situation.
I was going to say too, Ross, talk to your Lutheran camp and make sure they're taking advantage of the total inclusion education opportunities, and then follow up with them again to see how it's going to impact their ministry. There are dollars available and a lot of education for camps right now around these three specific groups. So challenge them, right? Like, are you being involved? And then once you've gotten the education, how is that impacting your ministry? Because, like everybody else, there's 1,000 things to do. But if camps hear from their constituents that this is important, they're more likely to put some effort and time into it. So ask and ask again and ask again. Yep.
Yeah. This is where I'm going to start with next week too, is us thinking of ourselves as consumers, both of our camps, like of the ELC ministries that could be taking advantage of this, but also if we're using outside resources that we don't quite know if they're coming from the same place that we are, it is always worth asking. And if you are setting up a program or a trip or something that's going to use outside vendors or outside resources, there are some things that you definitely should take within your power to think ahead about what those questions are. We'll get into that a little bit more next week. I'm seeing in the chat some good stuff. Janelle, do you want to just give a little bit of recap? I know there's been some conversation about inclusive language, about our whole lives and things like that.
Absolutely. All right, so there were some questions about blessings, and you gave some ideas for that. Again, just a reminder, if y'all have other ideas, feel free to throw those in there. People talked about not using brothers and sisters and instead talking of siblings in Christ or family in Christ. I don't know if you want to speak to that anymore, Ross.
You know what? I'll say something. So this is where I need my GLAD things. GLAD made some graphics for Transgender Awareness Week a long time ago. It just was like creative ways to do gender neutral language, and you know, getting with brothers, sisters, siblings, family, beloved, team, y'all. Right? There's so many things that we can do, and it might take 5 minutes of brainstorming really cool, creative, fun things that you can do that does get away from gendered language. That also, I will be honest, no one will miss it when it's gone. If you say we're going to take out the gender language, you'll have a freak out. But if you suddenly just start referring to everyone as beloved, or family or whatever, they're going to probably attach to that. And there may be things that have special significance theologically, historically for your congregation, right? Things that we can do for that. And so, you know, people freak out a lot about gender neutral language, and I think it actually is way less complicated and, quite frankly, much more creative and fun, that we can start to use for folks. Also, one weird story. I know we're running out of time, but I work for GLAAD in the daytime, and we show these, and we have little graphics. And one says, instead of guys, try using folks. And we did this presentation for people that were producing a TV show for MTV, and they said, I don't think folks is really on brand for MTV. And I was like, okay, team, beloved, family, like this is us giving you a suggestion, like, you are creative people, go be creative. And I'm saying that to us too. I think we can find some really cool stuff that gets away from that. Peeps. Oh, thank you, Molly. That's the one. Everyone has to refer to your congregation as peeps now.
Someone gave an idea of township pride youth groups. So I think they're possibly talking about grouping together if you're in a small town.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, there's, you know, Centerlink is the kind of the network of LGBT centers in cities and towns, and they're in large towns or small cities. They're not all just in major metropolitan areas. That's worthwhile looking. And then if they are, they probably have a little bit of a regional outreach, and they know they cover kind of a bigger geographic territory. So even if one's not in your immediate vicinity, one that fits 50 or 100 miles away might still have good resources because they know your state, or they know, you know, they know your community, and might be able to help you set up something in your own community as well.
Thank you. And for Our Whole Lives, it might be intensive and or costly. Where's a good place to start?
Yeah, I would. It is intensive and costly, and I will say they like their curriculum. They will train you into their curriculum. So it is one. It's probably at the moment the best, but it is going to be a bit. We only use the senior high section. It's aged out for specific stuff. So that is what we have done or paid for, and we sent one person to go get trained, and then they do it for the rest of us. So one, there can be a little bit of breakdown, but I also saw in the chat someone suggested sharing those resources between congregations, which I think is also a good idea. Or there might be other stuff besides Our Whole Lives. That's what I kind of know. Maybe we can all write our own, and then we can have our own specific Lutheran one too. So we'll keep that in our back pocket too.
I do run a website called elcafaithformation.org, and there is a page on sexuality with several different options, down from youth, young to a little older.
Mm-hmm.
We have about 3 minutes.
Excellent. And I see some, someone there put there too. Like I started with language and acronyms and LGBTQ and LGBTQIA plus and all those. And one thing is really important, and there was a good note in the chat as well that, you know, people ask what the right acronym is. There is no right acronym. But the reality is, if we say these letters that imply there's a community, then we also have to be intentional about what each of those letters mean. And so the needs or nuances for the bisexual community is going to be different than a gay or lesbian. And transgender is a gender identity, not a sexual orientation, right? Each one of these letters represents a unique community, and that unique community is unique. It's going to have its own particular struggles or joys or ways of connecting. And so we want to make sure that we're not just, saying the letters that sound right, because no one person is LGBTQ. I will say that we all are a particular sexual orientation and a particular gender identity. And so, the LGBTQ community is really big and broad and diverse. And so we make sure that we are hearing and listening what people are telling us about themselves. And then we learn how to treat them accordingly, even if it is a new term that we do not know. I tell folks, this is my last thing I'll say. I tell folks that if they know that they have a sexual orientation or a gender identity that is not commonly understood, that they should absolutely use the term that they use to describe themselves and then define that term in their own words. And us as leaders, as youth ministers, we listen, we learn what that term means through the context of a relationship that is someone that we know and who knows us and trusts us. And that person is a little tiny window into a bigger, larger community. And later we'll probably meet somebody else that uses that same term and learn how they're the same and how they're different, right? And then we get a wider understanding. And so I would much rather we learn terms about sexual orientation and gender identity through a relationship than through a textbook or a pop quiz or something like that, because that the relationship is what is important, and having them trust us and having us trust them and having that relationship and the Holy Spirit move between us is going to be incredibly important, and that's where we're going to build from there. So
All right,
I know.
Go ahead.
I know we're at time. Oh wow, that was like I threw 45 different things at you in a very short amount of time. So hopefully that got you interested in stuff. I know we've got a couple closing announcement things too. I'll share a couple follow-up resources. And again, Youth Ministry Network, I know, has been really, really instrumental putting together in the ELC Youth Ministry. So again, I'm going to thank you all. And I'm going to drop a couple things like my own, I have a website, and I'm just trying to put together some handouts and resources, things like what I shared with you. And so if you sign up for the email list, I can get those sent to you too.
All right, huge thanks to Ross for this time to discuss it in addition to his book. I'm going to ask Todd in just a minute, Pastor Todd, if he would pray us out in just a second. But just a reminder that we do have this again, noon next Tuesday and next Tuesday. So Ross will be with us next Tuesday. We're talking about looking outward. And then the third Tuesday, we're going to have a panel and talk to a few different people. Please feel free, if you're really motivated and excited about what you've been a part of today, you can still invite other people to be a part of this. They won't get the free book, but they're definitely welcome to be a part of the discussion. So by all means, if you're like, you need to pull in a lay volunteer, a ordained person, whoever from your group that you think also needs to be a part of this conversation, it's still an open door for that. So again, before I hand it over to Pastor Todd for a prayer, Ross, any last thoughts?
No, I'm looking forward to talking to you all again next week. I put the link there, but I also put, if you want to email me with follow-up questions, I will put that there too. So happy to chat more off of this hour big Zoom.
Take us away, Pastor Todd.
Sure. And thanks to all of you again for being here. And Ross, thanks so much. It's a great resource and a good conversation, and we're really grateful. Let's pray to end our time together. The Lord be with you. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for this day and this conversation that draws us deep into thinking about the relationships that we share and with young people and with all the people in our congregations and our communities. We ask for your blessings on these relationships, that they can grow and ultimately can deepen in the relationship with you. God, we ask for wisdom and guidance as we move from here and as we learn how to step into these relationships. Give us your guidance. We give you thanks for Ross and for his book and his passion for amen. Thanks, everyone.